Okay, so now we're going to do stage 4. Remembering this is your main. What we're going to place on the back of this would actually be our facing. Remember, if we're going to stitch our facing to our main, we would have already bagged out our centre front, so that would be bagged down on the inside. And then now we're going to stitch our facing down, which means if we were wearing this, that would be on the outside, this would be against the body or the skin. So make sure your main is facing, for your facing, make sure your good side or right side is facing out. Don't accidentally face it the wrong way. Make sure it's facing out. And if you imagine that this would be your buttons down the front of your jacket, you'd have a whole line of them, you'd have a whole complete facing coming down. This is just one little section. So we're going to place it on top. You can use your double-sided tape if you want to hold it in place. Put a bit of double-sided tape in there. I'm not going to, I'm just going to let it go free. We are going to place him and we're going to ditch stitch all the way around in that ditch. We're going to back tack at the beginning. Off we go. You might, if you find that getting into your corners is only half a stitch, use your back pedal to get right into those corners. And we're going the ditch all the way around. A ditch stitch does look much nicer than an edge stitch. Okay, so there are some people that will edge stitch it. It tends to bring too much attention to your buttonhole if you edge stitch. But if you want that feature, then by all means think about using it. I would suggest that you do a tester before you actually go into doing it on your garment, because make sure it goes right into the corner. The ditch stitch does look much better. Gives a much better finish to a buttonhole. Because you don't want your buttonholes necessarily to stand out and to be absolutely obvious. You want to sit them back and to be absolutely almost invisible. And remembering I've got 2 tones here with different fabrics. If I wanted them to be more invisible, then I would just do them in the same fabric. But just for the fact that we don't have that much, I'm using scrap hide. That's why. Okay. So trim him back. Trim him back on this side. Okay, so we've ditch stitched all the way around, and now what we're going to do is we're going to trim out that excess in the middle. When we trim out the excess in the middle, just like this sample, we should trim back to about 1 millimetre and a fraction over 1 millimetre, or a decent millimetre should I say, all the way around. Do not cut too close to your stitching, otherwise you'll cut your stitching. When you're cutting into the middle, make sure you're flipping those jets out of the way with your fingers so that you can actually cut into the middle and cut up and cut around. Use your finger underneath to keep away from cutting those jets. And then basically you trim your way all the way around. Let's see. Try not to get too close. That's the trick of it all. All the way around, as close as you can get without getting too close to them. If you find that that end might be a little bit far away, you can go back in and retrim him around, and then you'll go over to your rubber again and give him a bit of a nice old rub and push together. Okay, now depending on the fabric that you're using, if you did want your welt to stand out and be a bit more, because these go quite flat because this lamb is quite skinny, quite thin, sorry. You might want to, you could actually fuse your jet, or you could, I'll show you another technique of, this is what we call a closed seam, because these seams are closed and they go away from your jets. But when we actually do our next lot of jets, I'm going to show you what we call an open seam, which means part of that seam allowance goes back into the jet and gives the jet more substance. It gives it a bit more puffiness to it. So that you can use the same technique on your buttonholes if you want more substance to your buttonholes. But yeah, it really depends on the weight of your leather. Okay, that's the end of stage 4.